HOA President Dana Sparks jabbed a manicured finger into the breaker panel at 7:12 p.m. July 18, 2025, the hottest day of summer so far. "Cut it," she ordered the electrician. "I'm tired of this renter freeloading on our grid. My lights died." Before I could answer, in the sudden dark, my phone buzzed neighbor, after neighbor screaming that their houses were blacked out too. The whole cul-de-sac was gone. Dana's voice cracked, already looking for someone to blame. "You did this on purpose, didn't you, Elijah?" I stood barefoot on my porch, sweat stinging my eyes, holding the certified letters she'd refused to sign. Since April, the same letters that proved I'd paid every cent of the special assessment. $8,740 wired on May 3rd. Yet she kept posting red past due stickers on my door like clockwork. Behind her, the electrician's headlamp swung toward the transformer. "Ma'am, the main disconnect tripped the lateral feed. Oh, blocks cold." "You sure we should have Dana cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice cable? He's a troublemaker. Always has been." I stepped closer, the boards hot under my soles. "You just shut off power to elderly Mrs. Harjo on oxygen." "Dana, check your own email board minutes from last winter's show. You voted to let Nona residents pay assessments directly. You buried the motion so you could keep fining us." Her jaw twitched. For the first time tonight, fear flickered behind the arrogance. She hadn't expected me to quote chapter and verse. She expected me to beg. Sirens wailed up the street fire. Department, not police. The transformer at the corner exploded in a blue-white flash, showering sparks onto the July dry lawns. Dana spun, heels skidding on melted asphalt. "Fix it," she hissed at the electrician, "fast, and send him the bill." I raised the envelope. "Fix it with your own money, Dana. My meter shows zero draw from the grid tonight. I've been running on the rooftop panels you keep fining me for." Then again, 17 missed calls in 30 seconds. I flipped the envelope. "Board already cashed my $8,740. You kept the money and the fines." "That's fraud, Dana, and every neighbor without a C tonight is about to learn exactly where their summer assessment went." For the first time since I moved in, Dana Sparks looked. "Small dot," she whispered. "You can't prove intent." I tapped my phone. Livestream still rolling 48 viewers. At 7:15, now 300. Already did. Comments are asking why the HOA president drives a new Tesla bought 3 days after the assessment deadline. Somewhere down the block, a generator coughed. To life, Mrs. Harjo's porch light blinked on someone with an extension cord and a conscience. Dana's shoulders sagged. She knew what came next. The recall vote she'd delayed since February. The forensic audit motion I'd forced onto the August 7th agenda. The state investigator I'd emailed 20 minutes ago. Sirens closer now. Red strobes painted her face the color of guilt. I took one more step. "You thought cutting my line would scare me into silence? Instead, you cut the lights on your own lies." The twist wasn't just about tonight's blackout or the missing assessment money. Dana had no idea I'd already bought the house next door closing. July 30th, making me an owner, not a renter, with full voting rights and a seat on the board she couldn't block. The eviction notice she'd drafted against tenant Elijah Moore was about to become evidence in a wrongful termination of utilities suit that could cost her the home she leveraged to the hilt. The neighborhood had one demand now: flip the breaker, resign tonight, or face the recall that would strip her of every ounce of power she'd hoarded since the winter storm when she first learned how easy it was to hide. On a crisp April morning when the dogwoods still bloomed white along Riverside Drive, I'd received Dana's first notice. Hand-delivered at 6:47 a.m., slipped under my door while I was running the loop around Miller's Pond. Special assessment notice. $8,740 due May 15, 2025. Failure to pay will result in immediate lien filing and utility disconnection. I'd stared at the number, coffee growing cold in my mug. $8,740. The same storm that had somehow elevated Dana. From secretary to president, when the previous board resigned en masse, I'd called the management company first. "Sorry, Mr. Moore, but all assessment questions go through the board now." Ms. Sparks handles resident communications. Dana's response had been swift and dismissive. "Renters don't get payment plans. Full amount by May 15th, or we start proceedings." What proceedings exactly? eviction, utility, disconnection, whatever it takes. I'd hung up and done what I always did when faced with bureaucratic nonsense. I documented everything, every email, every phone call, every certified letter, the wire transfer confirmation from May 3rd showing $8,740 sent to Riverside Gardens, HOA operating account. The delivery confirmation from May 4th when I'd hand-delivered copies to Dana's house on Magnolia Court, the one with the for sale sign she'd hastily removed the next day, but the red stickers kept coming, past due in bold letters slapped on my door every Tuesday like clockwork. When I'd confronted her at the May 20th board meeting, she'd shuffled papers and claimed no record of payment. Mr. Moore, if you'd like to dispute this, you'll need to file a formal grievance. There's a $500 processing fee, $500 to prove I paid what I already paid. Board policy, non-negotiable. That's when I'd started recording everything, every interaction, every meeting, every smirk when she thought no one was watching. The small-town tyrant routine might work on other residents, but I'd spent 2 years in Afghanistan watching officers who thought rank meant they could rewrite reality. Dana Sparks was just another bully in a better suit. The harassment escalated through June, parking violations for my truck being 2 inches over the driveway line, architectural infractions for my solar panels being visually non-compliant. A formal complaint about my aggressive demeanor at board meetings, filed the same day I'd requested financial statements dating back to February. But I kept paying attention, kept documenting, kept showing up to meetings where Dana would shuffle the agenda to avoid my questions about missing funds and buried motions. Other residents started noticing too. The whispered conversations in the mailroom, the sideways glances. When Dana pulled up in her new Tesla Model Y, pearl white with custom wheels that cost more than most people's cars, by July, I had enough evidence to sink her. I just needed the right moment to surface it all. February 14th, 2025. Valentine's Day. The ice storm hit at 3:17 a.m., coating power lines with 2 inches of crystalline death. By sunrise, Riverside Gardens was dark and getting colder by the hour. I'd been living in the rental on Sycamore Street for exactly 6 months. The storm changed everything. Emergency board meeting, February 18th, Dana's dining room. 7 residents huddled around her gas fireplace while the development stayed frozen in time. President Matthews had already announced his resignation family emergency, moving to Florida, effective immediately. Vice President Chen was in the hospital with a broken hip from black ice. Secretary Williams was stranded in Denver, flights canceled indefinitely. "We need continuity," Dana had said, her voice steady in the candlelight. "I've been secretary for 3 years. I know the accounts, the contracts, the legal requirements. I can step up." She'd made it sound like a sacrifice instead of a power. Grabbed the remaining board members, 2 of 7, had voted her in unanimously. Emergency powers until April elections. Full authority to handle storm recovery, contractor negotiations, insurance claims. I'd raised my hand. "What about the bylaws? Emergency provisions, Mr. Moore. Article 7, Section C. In the event of natural disaster or other extraordinary circumstances, the remaining board members may act with full authority." I helped write those bylaws. Storm cleanup crews at $200 per hour. Tree removal at $350 per tree. Emergency generator rentals at $500 per day. All no-bid contracts with companies that seemed to exist only on hastily printed invoices. I'd started asking questions at the March meeting. Where's the insurance money? Why aren't we getting competitive bids? What happened to the reserve fund? These are owner concerns. But I'm paying the special assessment too, because you use the common areas. You benefit from the improvements. You don't get a say in how we manage the money. The other residents had nodded along. They trusted Dana. She'd lived here for 8 years, owned the biggest house on the prettiest street. She spoke their language of property values and neighborhood character. I was the outsider, the renter, something that would matter later. When Dana had passed around the contractor invoices, her hands had trembled slightly. Not from cold, the power had been back for 2 weeks. From something else. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Not much at first. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. Enough to pay for the Tesla down payment, the kitchen renovation, the designer handbags she carried to every meeting. Small amounts that wouldn't show up in casual audits. buried in legitimate expenses that residents wouldn't question. But I'd been questioning everything, and by summer, her small-scale fraud was about to become a very big problem. 7:20 p.m. Fire. Trucks screamed around the corner, red lights painting the darkened houses like a crime scene. Chief Martinez jumped down from the first truck, radio crackling with dispatcher updates. Transformer failure, Riverside Gardens, multiple residences without power, possible electrical fire hazard. Dana stepped forward, trying to reassert control. Chief, this is just a billing dispute. We disconnected one unit for non-payment. The outage is temporary. Martinez swept his flashlight across the blown transformer, sparks still dancing from the severed connections. Ma'am, you don't disconnect residential service by cutting main feeds. That's utility company work. What contractor authorized this? The electrician, a thin man with Rodriguez Electric embroidered on his shirt, shuffled forward. She said it was HOA property chief, said the resident was stealing power. Stealing power? Martinez's voice carried the tone of someone who'd seen enough stupidity for one career. You cut the lateral feed to a whole block because one resident was allegedly stealing power. I stepped into the light, still holding my payment documentation. Chief Martinez, I'm Elijah Moore. I live at 1247 Sycamore. I paid my assessment in full on May 3rd. Ms. Sparks has been harassing me for months, despite having proof of payment. Dana's voice turned shrill. He's lying. He's been freeloading since February. I have documentation. Show me. Martinez's tone cut through her protests. Right now, show me the billing records, the payment history, the legal authority to disconnect utility service. Dana fumbled with her phone, scrolling through screens. I don't have everything with me. It's all in the office. But I can assure you, ma'am, you just caused a neighborhood-wide blackout because you thought one resident hadn't paid a bill. Without verifying the payment, without following proper procedures, without checking if your actions would affect other residents. Martinez turned to Rodriguez. Sir, you're looking at potential criminal charges for illegal utility disconnection. This is a fire department matter now. My phone buzzed with notifications. The live stream had hit 500 viewers, then 700. Comments were flooding in from residents who'd found the stream through our neighborhood Facebook group. Double quotes, Sarah M_RG, is this why our power is out? Because Dana was harassing Elijah. Mike H_1253. I saw the Tesla purchase. Where did she get that money? Concerned resident. We need a forensic audit. Tonight, Dana's phone rang again. This time she answered, What do you mean, emergency board meeting? I didn't authorize ... What recall petition? Who's calling for... No, I can't come to the clubhouse right now. I'm dealing with a crisis. She hung up, face pale in the emergency lighting. Elijah, we can work this out. You don't need to make this public. I showed her the phone screen. Too late, Dana. 800 viewers and counting. They're asking really good questions about financial transparency. Chief Martinez had been listening to his radio. Dispatch, we need a utility company supervisor on scene. Also request a building inspector. This looks like unpermitted electrical work. Chief, I said, there's something else you should know. Ms. Sparks has been collecting special assessments but not recording payments. She's been issuing false violation notices, and she's been using her position to harass residents who ask questions about missing funds. Dana's composure finally cracked. That's slander. I'll sue you for defamation. With what money, Dana? The money you embezzled from the association? The money you used to buy the Tesla? The money you've been hiding in fake contractor invoices since February? Chief Martinez stepped between us. Ma'am, you need to step back, sir. Do you have evidence of these allegations? I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the photos I'd taken of every document, every payment confirmation, every violation notice. Everything's documented, Chief, including the board minutes where she voted to allow renters to pay assessments directly, then buried the motion so she could keep fining us. The fire chief studied the evidence, his expression growing darker with each screen. Ma'am, I think you need to speak with a lawyer. This is beyond fire department jurisdiction. Dana looked around at the gathering crowd of neighbors, at the emergency vehicles, at the smoking transformer that represented the death of her authority. You don't understand. I was protecting the community, property values, neighborhood standards. People like him, people like me. What? Dana? I stepped closer, my voice carrying over the crowd. People who pay their bills. People who ask questions. People who don't look like your idea of a proper homeowner. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Everyone could see the truth now, illuminated by emergency floodlights and live-streamed to a growing audience of very angry neighbors. 7:35 p.m. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 residents, some carrying flashlights, others holding phones to record the unfolding drama. Mrs. Harjo, the elderly woman on oxygen, had been safely evacuated to her daughter's house on the next block, but her empty, dark windows served as a stark reminder of Dana's recklessness. "Show them the Tesla purchase," someone called from the crowd. I didn't recognize the voice, but the comment had nearly 200 likes on the live stream. I pulled up the photos I'd taken 2 weeks ago, Dana's new Model Y in the driveway. Temporary tags, still visible, May 18th, 2025, 3 days after the special. Assessment deadline, base price $54,000, but she got the premium package, pearl white paint, custom wheels, full self-driving capability. That's about $68,000 after taxes. "Where does an HOA president get that kind of money?" asked Tom Wilson from Maple Street. He'd been questioning the assessment too, but quietly, privately, Dana's face had turned ashen. "My personal finances are none of your business. I have other income sources." "Do you?" I scrolled through more photos. "Your LinkedIn profile shows you as unemployed. Since 2023, your husband's construction company filed for bankruptcy in December. Your house has been on and off the market since January, but you keep pulling the listing when potential buyers ask about the HOA fees." Chief Martinez was still coordinating with the utility company, but he'd been listening. "Ms. Sparks, these are serious allegations. You might want to contact an attorney." "I don't need an attorney. I need everyone to calm down and let me handle this crisis." "The crisis you created," said Jennifer Chen from Oak Avenue. "My grandmother lived through the Depression. She's been saving for months to pay this assessment. Are you telling me you took her money and bought a luxury car?" Dana's phone buzzed with another call. This time the caller ID showed board attorney. She declined the call, but we all saw the label. "Even your lawyer's calling," I said. "Wonder what they want to discuss." The stream had hit 900 viewers. Comments were coming in faster than I could read them, but the theme was consistent. Outrage, demands for investigation, calls for immediate resignation. Several residents had started their own streams, creating a multi-angle documentary of Dana's downfall. "I have the bank records," called out a voice from the back. We turned to see David Park, the HOA treasurer, pushing through the crowd. He looked haggard, like he'd been running. "I've been trying to call you all day, Dana. The state auditor's office contacted me this afternoon. They want to see all financial records dating back to February." Dana's face went white. "David, this isn't the time, actually. It's exactly the time." David held up a folder thick with documents. "I've been reviewing the accounts since Tuesday. The insurance money from the storm damage, it came in March 15th. Full payment, $127,000. But the contractor invoices don't match the insurance records. Rodriguez Electric billed us $23,000 for work that the insurance company says cost $8,000. Rodriguez, the electrician, stepped forward. "Wait a minute. I never billed anyone $23,000. My invoice was for $8,000, exactly what the insurance paid." David nodded grimly. "Someone altered the invoices, added zeros, changed company names, created fake billing addresses. The excess money went into a separate account that only the president can access." "That's standard procedure," Dana said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Emergency funds require single signatory access. Emergency funds that you used to pay for personal expenses," David continued. "The Tesla loan payment came from the HOA account. So did the kitchen renovation, the designer handbags, the vacation to Cabo in June. I have copies of everything." The crowd was silent now, the weight of the fraud sinking in. This wasn't just about one resident's harassment. It was about systematic theft from the entire community. "How much?" asked Tom Wilson. David consulted his papers. "Approximately $89,000. Since February, special assessments, insurance money, reserve funds, all diverted to personal use." $89,000, I repeated, loud enough for the live stream to catch. That's about $1,400 per household stolen from your neighbors to fund Dana's lifestyle. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Criminal charges! We want criminal charges!" Chief Martinez had finished his radio conversation. "Ma'am, I strongly recommend you contact legal counsel immediately. This is now a potential criminal matter." Dana looked around at the faces surrounding her neighbors she'd lived next to for 8 years, people she'd shared holiday parties with, residents who'd trusted her with their community funds. The authority she'd wielded so arrogantly was evaporating. "Like steam in the July heat, I was going to pay it back," she whispered. "The house sale would have covered everything. I just needed time. Time to steal more money," I asked. "Time to harass more residents. Time to cut more power lines." She didn't answer. There was no answer that would make this right. 7:50 p.m. The utility company's supervisor had arrived, followed by a building inspector and, inevitably, a police officer. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 residents, united in their outrage at Dana's betrayal. "I need to see the authorization for this electrical work," the building inspector said, clipboard in hand. "Disconnecting residential service requires permits, utility company approval, and proper legal documentation." Dana fumbled through her purse, pulling out crumpled papers. "I have the eviction notice here. Legal authority to disconnect utilities. For non-payment," the inspector studied the document, frowning. "Ma'am, this is a draft notice. It's not signed, not notarized, not filed with the county. It has no legal standing. But he's a renter. I have the right to evict for non-payment, actually," I said, pulling out my own folder. "You don't." The crowd leaned in as I spread the documents on the hood of a fire truck. Property deed. Even the emergency radios seemed to quiet down. "You bought the Morrison house?" asked Jennifer Chen. "But it's been on the market for months." Cash offer, May 1st, the day after Dana posted her third fake violation notice on my door. I got tired of being harassed for being a renter, so I decided to stop being a renter. Dana's face cycled through confusion, anger, and finally, resignation. "You can't. Owners have to be approved by the board." "We have screening procedures for new purchases from outside buyers," I corrected, "but I've been a resident for 8 months. I've been paying the assessments you claim I haven't paid. I've been following all the rules you say I've been breaking. The screening requirement doesn't apply to existing residents." The police officer stepped forward. "Sir, does this change your legal standing in the association?" "Completely. As an owner, I have full voting rights. I can run for the board. I can access all financial records. I can file motions for forensic audits, and I can call for emergency meetings to address fiduciary violations." I turned to address the crowd, which is exactly what I did 20 minutes ago. I emailed the state HOA oversight office, the county district attorney, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. I included copies of all the financial documents David found, recordings of tonight's events, and evidence of systematic harassment. Of residents, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Dana looked like she was about to faint. "There's more," I continued. "The eviction notice Dana drafted. It's based on false claims of non-payment. That's harassment. The utility disconnection. Tonight, that's a legal retaliation. The missing assessment money. That's embezzlement. The fake contractor invoices. That's fraud." The police officer was taking notes. "Ma'am, I need to advise you of your rights. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait," Dana held up her hand. "I need to explain. The community needed strong leadership. Property values were declining. We had renters moving in, changing the neighborhood character. I was protecting everyone's investment by stealing from them," asked Tom Wilson, "by maintaining standards, by keeping out undesirable elements, by preserving what made this community special." The coded language wasn't lost on anyone. The neighborhood character she'd been protecting was exclusivity. The undesirable elements were people who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable residents. "You mean people like me," I said. "People who ask questions. People who don't look like your idea of a proper homeowner. People who challenge your authority." Dana's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand what it's like. I built this community. I organized the garden club, the holiday parties, the neighborhood watch. I kept property values high, kept the riffraff out. And then people like you move in and think you can just take over. People like me who pay their bills. People like me who follow the rules. People like me who catch you stealing from your neighbors. The police officer had heard enough. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for embezzlement, harassment, and illegal disconnection of utility services. You have the right to remain silent." As Dana was led away in handcuffs, the crowd began to disperse. The utility company was already working to restore power, splicing new connections around the damaged transformer. The building inspector was documenting the illegal electrical work. The fire chief was filing his report, but the real work was just beginning. Financial restitution, criminal prosecution, board elections, policy changes to prevent future abuse. David Park approached me as I was packing up my documents. "The emergency board meeting is tomorrow night. We need nominations for interim president." "I'm not interested in being president," I said. "I just want honest, transparent leadership. Someone who sees residents as people. We need someone who understands financial accountability. Houses dark but not defeated. Residents angry but not broken. A community that had learned the hard way that power without accountability leads to corruption." "I'll consider it," I said. "But first, let's get the lights back on." 8:15 p.m., the power flickered back on, house by house. As the utility crew completed their emergency repairs, porch lights bloomed like flowers, air conditioners hummed back to life, and the oppressive heat of July evening began to ease. I stood on my porch, watching the neighborhood come alive again. The live stream had ended with nearly 1,200 viewers, but the real story was just beginning. Dana's arrest had been shared across every local news outlet, every social media platform, every neighborhood group chat. The HOA president arrested for embezzlement headlines would run for days. Mrs. Harjo returned from her daughter's house, oxygen concentrator humming steadily as she waved from her driveway. "Thank you," she called over. "I was so scared when the power went out." "You shouldn't have been put in that position," I replied. "No one should." David Park had called an emergency board meeting for the next evening. The agenda was simple: accept Dana's resignation, elect interim leadership, authorize a forensic audit, and begin the process of financial recovery. The state investigator would arrive Monday morning. The district attorney's office was already preparing fraud charges. But tonight, as the temperature finally dropped below 90 degrees, the neighborhood was healing. Tom Wilson knocked on my door around 8:30. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I knew something was wrong with the assessments, but I didn't speak up. I let you fight alone." "You weren't alone," I replied. "You were scared." Dana created a culture of fear and intimidation. That's what bullies do. Still, I should have said something. You're saying something now. That's what matters. Over the next hour, more neighbors stopped by, some to apologize, some to ask questions, some just to say thank you. Each conversation was a small step toward rebuilding trust, and Community. Jennifer Chen brought homemade cookies. "My grandmother wanted to thank you. She said you reminded her of her father, someone who stood up to bullies even when it was dangerous." The Morrison house my house sat empty next door, waiting for closing day. But it already felt like home, not because of the property lines or the deed, but because of the community that had rallied together. When it mattered most, the recall petition that residents had been quietly circulating since February was no longer necessary. Dana's criminal charges would handle the removal from office. But the petition had served its purpose, had shown that residents were paying attention, that accountability mattered, that democracy worked even in the smallest communities. By 9 p.m., the emergency vehicles had cleared out. The transformer was repaired. The street lights cast their familiar glow over sidewalks where children would play again tomorrow, where neighbors would walk their dogs and chat about ordinary things. Instead of corruption and fraud, my phone buzzed with a text from the state investigator. "Preliminary review complete. Excellent documentation." I'd learned that thoroughness in Afghanistan, where attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. Tonight, it had meant the difference between justice and continued corruption. The live-stream comments were still coming in, but the tone had shifted from outrage to celebration. Residents were sharing their own stories of Dana's harassment, their own suspicions about missing funds, their own relief that someone had finally stood up to the neighborhood tyrant. Elijah Moore _RG. Thank you all for your support tonight. This was never about me versus Dana. It was about accountability versus corruption, transparency versus secrecy, community versus personal power. Mike H _1253. When's the next board meeting? I want to nominate you for president. Elijah Moore _RG. I'm honored, but I think we need fresh leadership from multiple perspectives. Democracy works best when power is shared, not concentrated. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the rental house where I'd been harassed for 8 months to the ownership that had given me standing to fight back. From the isolated renter asking uncomfortable questions to the community member who'd helped expose systematic fraud, the real victory wasn't Dana's arrest or the recovered funds or the restored power. It was the neighborhood that had learned to stand up for itself. The residents who'd discovered their own power to demand accountability, the community that had chosen justice over comfortable silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Financial recovery would take months. Trust would take longer to rebuild. Changes to the HOA bylaws would require careful thought and community input to prevent future abuse. But tonight, as I turned off the lights in my rental house for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Hope that small communities could police themselves when given the tools and courage to act. Hope that justice didn't require lawyers or courts or lengthy legal battles. Sometimes it just required one person willing to document the truth and share it. With neighbors who cared, the closing on July 30th would be a formality. I was all ready. Home. 3 weeks later, the August 7th board meeting drew the largest crowd in Riverside Gardens history. 93 residents packed the clubhouse, with dozens more joining via live stream. The forensic audit had recovered $74,000 in traceable funds, with criminal restitution proceedings underway for the remainder. Dana pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges, receiving 2 years in prison and a $50,000 fine. Her house sold in September to cover legal fees and partial restitution. The Tesla was seized and sold. With proceeds returned to the HOA, the new board included Tom Wilson as president, Jennifer Chen as vice president, and David Park continuing as treasurer. I accepted the position of secretary, focusing on transparency and communication rather than executive power. The first order of business was rewriting the bylaws. No single person could access funds without co-signatures. All financial records would be published monthly. Emergency powers required community ratification within 30 days. Harassment policies were strengthened with clear consequences for board members who abused their authority. Mrs. Harjo was elected to the Architectural Review Committee, where her gentle wisdom helped create more reasonable standards for home modifications. The solar panel restrictions were eliminated entirely by winter. Property values had actually increased, not because of exclusionary policies or intimidation tactics, but because buyers appreciated transparent leadership and genuine community engagement. The 4 sale signs that had dotted the neighborhood during Dana's reign disappeared as residents chose to stay and build something better. The story spread beyond Riverside Gardens. I received emails from HOA residents across the country sharing their own stories of board corruption and asking for advice on documentation and accountability. The live stream recording became a case study in grassroots democracy, viewed more than 50,000 times by residents fighting similar battles in their own communities. But the real measure of success wasn't in numbers or headlines. It was in the small moments that followed. Children playing safely in streets where neighbors looked out for each other. Holiday parties where residents felt welcome, regardless of their housing status. Board meetings where questions were welcomed rather than silenced. The transformation wasn't perfect. Some residents still harbored resentments about the changes. A few moved away, preferring the old system of unquestioned authority. But the majority embraced the new culture of accountability and inclusion. On July 18, 2026, exactly 1 year after the blackout, the community held its first annual Transparency Day. Residents gathered for a block party, complete with grilled food, live music, and financial reports presented in plain English. Children drew pictures of the neighborhood, while adults discussed budget priorities and improvement projects. I stood in the same spot where Dana had ordered the power cut, now surrounded by friends and neighbors who'd become partners in building something better. The transformer had been upgraded, the electrical systems modernized, and emergency procedures established to prevent future outages. "Hard to believe it's only been a year," said Jennifer Chen, watching kids chase fireflies in the growing dusk. "Some years change everything," I replied. "The question is whether we learned enough to keep it changed." She smiled. "I think we did. Dana taught us what happens when power goes unchecked. You taught us what happens when someone fights back. Now we're teaching each other what happens when a community decides to govern itself." The evening was warm, but not oppressive. A gentle breeze carrying the scent of barbecue and blooming jasmine. Solar panels glinted on rooftops throughout the neighborhood, no longer controversial, but celebrated as symbols of innovation and independence. As the block party wound down and residents began cleaning up, I reflected on the journey from that first harassment notice to this moment of genuine community. The fight had been about more than money or power or even justice. It had been about dignity, the right to be treated with respect, regardless of your housing status, your background, or your willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. The neighborhood had learned that democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires participation, vigilance, and the courage to speak truth to power, even when that power lives next door and controls your utilities. But most importantly, it had learned that change is possible when people choose to act together instead of suffer alone, that small communities can be laboratories for justice, proving that accountability and transparency aren't just ideals, they're achievable goals for anyone willing to do the work. The lights stayed on. The community endured. And somewhere in the night, other residents in other neighborhoods were beginning to ask their own uncomfortable questions about their own local tyrants, inspired by the proof that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary justice when they refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. The transformation of Riverside Gardens wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning proof that democracy works best when it works for everyone, and that the most powerful force for change isn't money or connections or legal authority, it's neighbors who decide they've had enough and choose to do something about it together.